Welcome back to IDP Plus Trends. On this episode, Steve and I are going to break down some IDP Week 7 top 25 lists. We have our IDP Plus rankings from the IDP Plus website. So if you are not subscribed, if you are not familiar with the website, go to idpplus.com. And then from there, I will share my screen here, and we will get into defensive linemen first. So I'm sharing my screen. We are looking at weekly defensive line rankings, which Steve took on. I'm going to read them 1 through 25 for anyone who is not viewing and just listening. Number 1 is Myles Garrett. Number 2, Maxx Crosby. Number 3, Nick Bosa. Number 4, TJ Watt. Number 5, Trey Hendrickson. 6, Will Anderson. 7, Josh Hines-Allen. Number 8, Danielle Hunter. Number 9, Dexter Lawrence. Number 10, Brian Burns. 11, Boye Mafe. 12, Keon White. 13, Will McDonald. 14, Alex Highsmith. 15, already played, Carl Granderson. 16, Khalil Mack. 17, Jonathan Grenard. 18, Trayvon Walker. 19, Josh Sweat. 20, Dorrance Armstrong. 21, already played, Jonathan Cooper. 22, George Karlaftis. 23, Greg Russo. 24, Matthew Judon. And 25, Derek Hall. So with just looking at that top 25, Steve, when you were diving into it and checking out this rankings list, and this is by our weekly rankings for the defensive linemen are done by Justin Fry. He is at JFRYE, JFryDP. JFryDP. Steve, what do you think about this top 25 list? Who are some people that you really like in their matchups, and who are some people that you may be a little bit higher on than this list?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad list at all. I mean, obviously, a lot of these guys, you pretty much can just kind of leave them and set them. Like, you don't really need to necessarily determine, like, you're talking Garrett and Maxx Crosby and Watt. Like, these are guys you're going to leave in your lineup. Who cares where you rank them? They're still going to be successful. Now, looking at the list, though, there are 2 players that I felt kind of got a little disrespected that I feel like just because of the matchup, I think they should be a little higher. So the first one, like I have, is going to be Will McDonald for the Jets. Like, he's actually done pretty good. I've talked about him in my waiver wire videos. If you guys haven't checked those out. But going against the Steelers, 2 things, and I'm sure you can feel this way as a fan. They have not announced it, but Russell Wilson's probably going to start. Like, it's been said without being said. I think they even had an interview where George Pickens even kind of said, like, they've been practicing outside of practice. Like, he's kind of said it. So here's my concern with the change. With right now, the mobility of Justin Fields, I think, helps the Steelers be an effective team. Like, there are some still O-line struggles, and Justin Fields, even though he holds the ball a little longer than I would like to see out of a quarterback, he's still able to make up for some of those mistakes because of his legs. When you've got a defensive end like McDonald, who's pretty successful so far this season, is going against a quarterback who's an aging quarterback against an offensive line who is just struggling. Yeah, Russell Wilson can get the ball off a little bit faster, but man, if he's just going to be a sitting duck. He does not have the same mobility as, Fields. And the fact is, Will McDonald's ranked 13th right now. I would probably move him close into the top 10. I think performance-wise, I think he can kind of get there. I think you should absolutely start him as a top 10 type of defensive lineman this week just because of the change. Now, if Fields was the quarterback, which could still happen, I mean, again, nothing's been official out of Pittsburgh. If Fields is still the quarterback, I don't mind him at 13. I think McDonald isn't in a bad spot, but I think if Russell Wilson does come into this lineup, I'm scared for him and that offensive line. So I do have some concerns. Another player that I really want to talk about is going to be Matthew Judon for the Falcons versus the Seahawks. Right now, we have him on this list at 24, which puts him as a defensive 2. When it comes to your lineup, if you have 2 playing, Judon has not been successful this season as what at least Atlanta hoped, right? They went in after him. They thought, because that's been a struggle. I don't know. I feel like it's been like 20 years since the last time the Falcons have actually had a good defensive end. Like, they keep trying, they keep drafting, and they just keep having no success year after year. And so here's my thing. Judon has not been successful, but he's going against a Seahawks team that attempts the most passing period this year. Now that might change. I think they're being very aware of that, and they're trying to get obviously Walker and Charbonnet a little bit more touches on the ground. But Geno Smith has been passing an absolute large amount this season. And on top of that, the offensive line, even though they've had some good games, they're the 6th worst rated pass blocking offensive line in the league right now. And they're allowing 58 pressures, 2 defensive ends, and have allowed 7 sacks off the edge. So again, Judon has been very successful when given opportunities like this. And the fact is, I think Atlanta can keep this offense going, forcing Seattle to be in passing situations, which is what they've been doing all year. Again, giving Judon an opportunity. So again, 24, I'm a little bit higher on him on that one. I'm getting him. I'm not putting him in the D1 status, but I still think he's a lot higher than 24. I think he probably falls in that 17 to 18 range because I really do love his matchup this week. So those are probably my 2 that I think I would make some changes based off of where we are here. Now, defensive lineman, I don't really love. The number 1, I would take him outside of that top 25 is George Kalafdis for the Chiefs versus the 49ers. 1, you're going against the best left tackle in the game, Trent Williams. Like anybody going against Trent Williams is going to have some struggles. So that automatically just takes him out. Like he's not worth starting at all this year or this matchup. The other thing is with George is he hasn't had a sack since week 2. He's averaging only 2 tackles per game. And typically it's on the assist side. So the fact is he's not getting you tackles. He gets at a QB pressure every once in a while, and he's not getting sacks. He's not creating turnovers. He's not getting fumble forces. He's not getting fumble recoveries. Like in a lot of the IDP leagues I'm in, he's not even rostered at this point. So I think he's a little too high at 22. I understand coming off of a bye week, some people get excited because you're fresh, you got fresh legs, you're able to have almost 2 weeks to kind of plan for your opponent. So sometimes you have a little bit better plan. But I am not crazy about this matchup for him, and I'm not crazy about where he's ranked. We do still have this hasn't been updated yet, but Dorrance Armstrong, I just want to notate, is out here. He's out this week for the Commanders, so he's not going to be playing. Just want to give an update. So we're going to have to obviously make some changes. And these are very fluid, so they're going to make some change. We make changes constantly. I know I do the quarterback rankings for IDP Plus, and with the trades and everything, I've got, a lot of quarterback changes, with Amari Cooper and obviously Devontae Adams making some moves. So now the other guy I'm not crazy about this week, and it's more so just kind of a gut feeling. As much as I love Brian Burns, and I talked about him in my waiver wire video this week, I feel like this is going to be more of a Dexter Lawrence game. And I think Brian Burns at 10 is a little too high for me. I'd still have him in the top 24. I still think you should start him. But I'm not quite as high on him as this ranking is right now. I do think Lawrence does feast. I do think this game is going to be a Saquon game. I think they're going to absolutely try to give him the opportunity to just go after his former team. Like, this is the revenge game that I think we're all kind of waiting to see. So I don't think this is going to be an opportunity where, Hurts is throwing often, and the ability to run kind of, I think, offsets some of Brian Burns' athletic ability. He's again, very athletic defensive end. He's not really had the season I think most Giants, fans would love to have seen, like he was in Carolina. So again, right now at 10, I'd probably put him more of a defensive end too. I put him into that 13 to 14 range. I still think he'll have some success. I'm not going to say sit him at all, but I think Dexter Lawrence is actually in a really good spot at 9. I think he's going to feast, but I'm going to take Brian Burns a little bit lower. I still think he's worth starting. I just don't love this matchup for him. They're going to move him around. I think Lane Johnson is expected to play, which is good news for the Eagles because they do need that right tackle. He's when he doesn't play, the Eagles struggle. And I do think this is going to be more of I think it's going to be a Saquon game. I just think, and I don't blame him. He's going to want that revenge, So I think he's going to be very successful in this one. And I think that kind of negates Brian Burns this week.
Yeah, I agree with those points, Steve. You made a lot of great ones. I agree first and foremost with the Pittsburgh Jets game. Will McDonald coming off back-to-back games with sacks. Those were bad matchups too, Miami and Buffalo. So now he gets a better matchup. We're hoping that it's going to be Russell Wilson to start there. It gives him an even better chance to get a sack. As far as if you're playing in a tackle heavy league, you had mentioned Matt Judon kind of not being the player we are accustomed to. We thought he was going to be in Atlanta. Right now, Grady Jarrett is out there. He is not getting a bunch of sacks. I believe he has 1.5 on the season, but the tackles are there for him. So that may be some guy deeper on this list, obviously not in the top 25, that if you're in a tackle heavy league, and he actually might be outscoring Judon in that sense too. So somebody who's a deeper kind of play. And then Karlaftis too. I mean, it's week 7. Here we are. Before the season, you told us that Karlaftis, at 22 is too high, perhaps too high. That's a crazy world we live in, but that's where we are. And hey, any given time he can make the switch. But good point to you, Steve. It's very unlikely to be this week versus Trent Williams. So great call there. Is there one? Go ahead.
Yeah, and back on Grady Jarrett, I actually glad you mentioned him because I think he's not getting any love this season. I talked to him in my waiver wire video for week 7, and I think Judon actually has been beneficial for Grady. Like, I think that's been huge for him. Like, he looks like the old Grady Jarrett that made the Pro Bowl a few times. Like, I think it's been really beneficial. Yeah, he's not getting the sacks, but he's getting QB hits. He's getting pressures. He's making tackles. I think that's been huge for him. So I think he's been the biggest benefactor. Not again what we're hoping for, but his performance is like his 2020 season where he last made the Pro Bowl. Like, he's very similar in that aspect, especially when it comes to averaging fantasy points. So I'm glad you mentioned him. I know he doesn't get the love, but he's one of my favorite defensive tackles right now. Like, again, probably top 5 when it comes to fantasy, but yeah, I think he's a big one for sure.
Right. Steve, is there anybody, this might be wasn't scripted. We didn't plan to go past 25 here. Is there anybody maybe looking down this list that you would not be surprised? They're not ranked in the top 25, but is there a player you think could finish there here in week 7?
So I looked at this list, right? And there's probably more. I would probably even move up. A couple of names that I thought of almost right away was Sam Hubbard for the Cincinnati Bengals against Cleveland. I know we've got we've got Hendrickson up here at the top 5, which is respectable. And I think he's going to feast. But I think Sam Hubbard should get a little bit more respect. He's 31 right now. At this point, I don't know why he's so low. Andrew Van Ginkel for the Vikings. I don't know what it is about him this season, but being 34 is just way too low for me. He has been amazing so far this season. I wasn't sure how that was going to play out when he went from Miami to Minnesota, but man, he just makes plays. It's crazy because I think people have kind of wanted to write him off, and he was never going to replace Danielle Hunter, who went to Houston. But the fact is, Ginkel's making plays, he's making sacks, he's making interceptions. Like, he's all over the field. And here's the only downside is going against Detroit. Detroit's obviously a run-heavy team. He's going to have tackle opportunities. But that offensive line, Detroit's offensive line is outstanding. Like, it's tough for Van Ginkel to have a huge game, but I still think he should be in your lineup. Like, if we're talking 2 defensive linemen for your roster and say a 12-team league, that's 24 players, and he's outside of that, I still think he should be starting. So I think he deserves more love. I don't think he should be any lower. But those are probably the 2 big ones, like Sam Hubbard and Van Ginkel are like probably my 2 that I was like, man, these guys definitely need a little bit more respect.
Okay. Well, we'll see if we can get it this week for them. I mean, Sam Hubbard, Cincinnati playing Cleveland. Cleveland, this is the team that Deshaun Watson leads the league in times getting sacked with 31 thus far. So, I mean, this is a great matchup. Another guy who you had said on that same team is Trey Hendrickson. That's a guy who I wanted to talk about here at number 5. Great spot for him. I think him and Sam Hubbard, just that you had mentioned, not only get a great matchup, but Trey Hendrickson has been great coming off, I believe, 2 sack game. So, man, I love this matchup. I think number 5's fitting for him. He's definitely a top 5 play to me this week, and hopefully he can feast. And then one more I wanted to touch on this top 25 that I really like, that I think maybe I could see them ending up a higher finish is number 23, Greg Rousseau. Definitely belongs in the top 25. But the matchup versus Tennessee, it doesn't look the sexiest on paper, but Tennessee, I believe, is giving up a pressure every 3 dropbacks. So, there's a lot of pressure going on there for Will Levis. We saw Greg Russo have those 3 sacks week 1 and then kind of disappear. So fair enough. You can't have him at top 5 and based on potential. We have to, have some stats to back it up. But Greg Russo, I think if there's a week where he's going to be that top 5, top 10 defensive lineman, I think it very well could be this week versus Tennessee. So some great matchups there. Steve, before we move on to linebackers, is there anything else you would like to say about the list, about defensive linemen, anything else?
No, I mean, don't get too fancy when you look at these rankings. I mean, most of these players are players you're going to put in your lineup like every single week. You set it, forget it, don't talk about it, whatever. Like, there's no reason to really overthink it. I would say when it comes to defensive linemen, obviously you're looking always for upside, looking at what kind of matchups, what does the game script possibly look like. So that would be a big factor. And you've got to look at the tackles that these guys are going to be facing week in and week out. I think too many people don't look at that when they're thinking about their matchups. Like I have one of my favorite players right now this season has been Zach Baun for the Broncos, the defensive tackle. He's been fantastic. I had him playing last night. I had no reason to bench him. Didn't perform as great. He had half a sack still. He still, did well. Like, don't get me wrong. I thought he was going to actually perform a lot better against Rattler and that Saints offensive line. I mean, the Broncos defense played well. I picked them up as one of my favorite streaming defenses. So, they got that touchdown towards the end. They should have had the second one with Barton freaking that got, whatever. We're not going to complain about that. But, these are things we got to think about. A lot of these players, especially the top 10, you're not even moving. But matchups can play a factor. And I think that's what we're here to help you out with those rankings, kind of figuring that out, talk about, how well and how successful are their injuries. Like the Giants just lost their left tackle, Thomas, like that's a big deal, right? Like Josh Sweat is probably going to feast this week. There's the things that you've got to start, paying attention to. And hopefully we're helping you guys out. That's what we're here for. Hopefully this is going to give you some advice, give you some confirmation for the moves. Like at the end of the day, we could say Maxx Crosby might be number 1. Look, don't hold us to it, but everything we give you is just to kind of give you a better understanding of who you should play. At the end of the day, it's fantasy. Things in football can change in a dime. One of these players can get hurt, hopefully not, but a lot of these guys have been fantastic. So I'm excited. I'm actually excited to hear what your linebacker and defensive back rankings, because man, defensive back has been such a struggle for me personally. Because I picked up Riley Moss for the Broncos, and he's been successful for like almost every single week, and then he laid a dud yesterday. A little disappointed. I almost benched him, cut him, get rid of him, but and then you have some players, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, but you got players like Winfield and Derwin James who are at this point just names. They're nowhere near their former selves. So I am curious what your thoughts are on these.
Well, we'll get there to the defensive backs in a few minutes here, but right now we're going to switch over to the linebackers. So once again, I am sharing my screen. If you are on our idpplus.com website, our main hub here, homepage, how I get to these rankings, there's a top bar where you see fantasy rankings, bets, tools, and memberships. You just hover over rankings, and keep in mind, these are our weekly rankings. This is not for, you can get season rankings, consensus, dynasty, projections. Right now we are going to weekly and then hover over to the LBs, weekly LBs for your week 7 lineups here. Now let's get into lineups. Into our top 25. This is actually my list. Steve, this is the first time that we've talked about it. The first time, you and I have looked over this list together. So let me put a disclaimer. Feel free to pick me apart. I do play in a lot of tackle heavy leagues. So that's kind of usually how my rankings run. But the thing is to me it doesn't matter what scoring you play. Like we have Fred Warner here at number 1. Fred Warner's had 4 forced fumbles in his first 5 or 6 games. So to me, it's like those things happen, and now we have to account for it because we know that Fred Warner's that type of player. But when it's all said and done, you cannot call an interception. It's very tough for a linebacker to predict a sack. So that's why I like to stick to tackle heavy formats and scoring here, and that's what bleeds over into my rankings. So here we go for my weekly linebacker rankings for week 7, I have Fred Warner, number 1. Number 2, Roquan Smith. Number 3, Bobby Wagner. Number 4, Robert Spillane. Number 5, EJ Speed. Number 6, Logan Wilson. Number 7, Zaire Franklin. Number 8, Levante David. Number 9, Trevin Wallace. Number 10, Zach Baun. Number 11, Dorian Williams. Number 12, Tyrell Dodson. Number 13, Jermaine Pratt. Number 14, Ernest Jones. 15, Quay Walker. 16, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. Number 17, Quincy Williams. 18, Nick Bolton. Number 19, Nakobe Dean. 20, Terrell Bernard. 21, Devin Lloyd. 22, Kenneth Murray. 23, Ivan Pace Jr. 24, Frankie Louvu. And finally, at 25, just cracking the list, Ventrell Miller. So, Steve, a couple things I wanted to say before I let you digest. I'll let you digest this for a minute, and I'll talk about a couple discrepancies I may have had. But going back to it, number 1, Fred Warner. This is a point where it's only 2 bye weeks, but linebackers have really fluctuated this year. Usually, you see like the top 15, top 20, are just like studded out, and I don't think that's exactly the case. I mean, there's questions when you look at like even past Levante David. You look at number 9, I have Trevin Wallace. All the way through 25, you can find something bad about these guys. So it's not all sexy, but going back to it, Fred Warner, just in a great matchup, the model of consistency at the linebacker position. Roquan Smith, that's a tough 2 to me, but there's some guys on this list, Steve, that I'm sure you'll point out, and that's what you're thinking, that are, if you look at consensus rankings, like my guys are, big discrepancies. For instance, Trevin Wallace, I don't know if on Fantasy Pros he might crack top 30. For me, he's number 9 this week. Again, I go tackle heavy. That's what I'm kind of honing in on here when it comes to these rankings. But, I actually playing a league where I have Zach Baun, and I just dropped, it's a shallow IDP, but I just dropped Zach Baun to pick up Trevin Wallace. And again, going back to it, I mean, this is unprecedented, but you have 2 weeks with no Josie Jewell. I believe he has maybe 18, 19 solo tackles in that span. Over 25 tackles in those, just a pair of games without Josie Jewell, and since he took the starting spot. So for me, I got him over Zach Baun, Dorian Williams, Pratt. Like, these guys have been great all year, but to me, Trevin Wallace, just his upside that he brings, and I think the floor that he's going to have. I mean, they don't have any other really healthy linebackers there, so I just think in a game where this is actually better matchup versus Washington than his last 2 games. So I cannot wait to see Trevin Wallace put up another 20-piece for my fantasy team now. Another guy I have that I think is a little bit high, who I like. Here we go. We talk about a guy who's playing almost 100% of snaps for Philadelphia, Nakobe Dean, somebody who I wasn't high on coming into the year, but here we are, and he's a top 20 play for me. Again, just going back to the tackles, like, he's just been so consistent with those tackles, 34 of them over the last 4 games. That's an average of 8.5. So when you have a guy playing close to 100% of snaps, he gets a good matchup versus the Giants. To me, I think Nakobe Dean in most rankings is a little bit lower, and I think he has a safe floor. So that's why I'm ready to rock with him inside my top 20. Another guy who you see right behind him, Terrell Bernard. This guy's probably going to be higher in a lot of other rankings. To me, he comes off that pec injury, and I see a little bit of cracks in the foundation here. I mean, he played 100% of snaps both games he's been back. Don't get me wrong. That's half the battle, is playing the snaps. But he's only showed for 11 tackles combined in those 2 games. So that's an average of 5.5. That's not going to cut it in tackle-heavy scoring. So Terrell Bernard, I don't know if it's, delay coming back from injury. We have Dorian Williams there just completely eating, somebody who I have ranked even higher than Terrell Bernard. Dorian Williams, I got at number 11. So I have a bunch of, love for these young guys. And just, Dorian Williams himself, he's averaging 10 tackles a game. So to me, again, going back to that tackle heavy, like his ceiling, his floor is so high. Actually, Dorian Williams played his highest percent snap share on defense, 96 this past week. And actually, ironic as it is, that was his lowest output of tackles with only 6 combined. But man, I think he's a walking bomb. Dorian Williams, I think, is a safe 8 to 10 tackles. And I just can't say the same right now at this given time, week 7 for Terrell Bernard. So that's why I'm a little bit low on him. Another guy, Ivan Pace. Ivan Pace, gets that 23 spot for me. He's inside my top 25. Maybe a lot of people want to see it before they believe it, but I mean, I'm just going on the hunch here. I mean, I know that Blake Cashman's out this week. Doesn't exactly mean Ivan Pace is going to take his spot. They have Camus, Grugier, Hill there. But if I'm taking one of these linebackers, it's easily going to be Pace. There was a point in time not too long ago last year when Ivan Pace took over that green dot role and, absolutely feasted, averaging over double-digit tackles a game. So I'm not saying this is a shoe-in, but, when we look at his upside that he could bring with no Cashman there and a great matchup versus Detroit, I just think it's a smash play. So I'm bullish on Ivan Pace probably more than other people. And then two guys I wanted to give honorable mentions. You see Ventrell Miller here. I have at 25. He's inside the top 25. He's had 28 tackles over the last 3 games, over his last 3 starts because Foyer's out. So he just barely makes the cut, and I'm fine with him. I mean, this is bullish again, top 25 guy. But even in a tough matchup versus New England, he's shown, especially with solo tackles, 22 of them in those last 3 games. So more than 7 solos just by themselves a game for Ventrell Miller. This is just a 1 week, maybe, stopgap here. We'll see what happens when Foyer comes back. And if it is next week, Ventrell Miller is not going to be this high at 25, but that's a story for another time. But my 2 honorable mentions, I wanted to mention some guys that I didn't have inside the top 25 who I could easily see, getting there. And I'm actually going to go to the next one at 26, and that's Mack Wilson Sr. for Arizona. Keep in mind they might be without Kaiser White this week, and I know that would mean Chris Barnes gets this replacement start for him. But Mack Wilson last week when Kaiser went down played a season-high 92% snaps. This is against a Chargers team that runs the ball an awful lot. Chris Barnes would be a nice 1 week spot starter, but I think Mack Wilson has the higher upside and the safer floor too. So I think he could definitely, have that upside with a, safe 10, 12 points for you. Bobby O, I'm going to kind of, go over him, not glance over him. Cody Barton had that great week, but here we go. My next guy, my second guy, honorable mention, like 29 is pretty high for Nate Landman. I think he could even go higher. I mean, that's what I hesitated. Like not having him in my top 25 breaks my heart. Cody Barton too, looking back. But man, Nate Landman, 2 forced fumbles last week. When he gets 100% of snaps, he just eats. You remember who he was last year? He was a household name in IDP community. And I think coming off IR, I think he had 6 or 8 tackles last week and 2 forced fumbles. So Nate Landman with no Troy Anderson, that is the key caveat. Troy Anderson is not going to play next week. If Troy Anderson comes back, then we're in a crapshoot again. We got, Ellis, Landman, and Anderson, and they all kind of negate each other's value. But right now, when you're telling me no Troy Anderson in a decent matchup versus Seattle, yeah, Nate Landman is a guy, if you're looking for tackles, he's just going to eat them up. So those are 2 honorable mentions. Steve, what do you think of my top 25 list here?
I mean, I don't hate it. A couple of things when I looked at it was like I feel like Levante David should go a little higher. He's been great the last few weeks. If you actually look at the last 3 weeks, I think he's been like LB1 because of his performance, not just with tackles, but sacks and things like that. So he's been actually really good. And his matchup against Baltimore is going to be definitely a run. I think Baltimore's going to try to establish the run, against, I would call it a softer Bucs defense. They're not known for being, big deep, like strong guys. They're not known to smash you in the mouth type of thing. So I think they'll try to beat them up that way. But I will say one player I did not see up in that top 25, and I get it. Linebackers are so hard because realistically, a lot of these guys can be starters. But I'm going to give one guy some love. It's going to be Alex Anzalone for the Detroit Lions.
Mm-hmm.
He hasn't been as successful as he started off, then he got hurt, and then I don't know. There's something about it. He's been having some struggle, but I will say this matchup, I think, is what I like about it.
Mm-hmm.
I do think Vikings will try to slow down Detroit's offense by trying to run, even though they will most likely not have Aaron Jones. Obviously, they have Cam Akers they just traded for. They have Ty Chandler. Um, and I think this can be a game where I think Anzalone can feast some. I think he can get some tackles. I think he can have some success there. Because again, I had him. I had Anzalone. I benched him. I ended up dropping him because I needed another linebacker, and I actually picked up Dorian Williams, who has been fantastic. I'm
Great
glad I
pickup.
made that move. But then I picked up Anzalone again. I have him sitting on the bench. I haven't decided if I'm going to start him yet, because I've got some other linebackers I really, really like. But I feel like he can get a little bit more love because I'm not sold on Patrick Queen or Caden Ellis quite yet. Like, I was really excited for Patrick Queen. I really thought Pittsburgh actually had a good linebacker again. At least, have some type of, fantasy relevancy. But unfortunately, Pittsburgh did it again. They just haven't had anybody unless you're on the edge. Those are the only guys who have had success in Pittsburgh's defense. So unfortunate, but I do think the Jets will obviously establish, the run. So I can see why Patrick Queen's a little bit higher, but I think Anzalone is definitely somebody I really like. And then as far as another big, I don't know if you would call him a big name, but somebody I really like as far as a nice little sleeper is Marte Mapu for the Patriots. I like him. I don't know why. There's something about him. I like him. Like, I feel the matchup seems right for him. I'm not saying he's going to be an LB1. He can be a nice little LB2. You're trying to, or maybe if you got a team that's got, linebackers plus you got just IDP players, right? You can pick whatever position you like. I think Mapu's done. I think he's going to be one that I secretly just feel like he's going to have a really good game. And he's really low. So he's one of those like sleepers. Like he's going to be one of those sleepers, and I like him. There's something about having Gerard Mayo as your head coach. He's going to put the pressure on his linebackers. He's got that pride. So I like him, again, as a nice little sleeper. But I don't think the list is bad at all. I mean, it's tough. Like, you could go back and forth with Fred Warner. I do think Roquan Smith's a little too high. He has not performed anywhere near his preseason rankings. Like,
Right.
I have Roquan in one of my IDPs. I don't want to drop him because I feel like as soon as I do, he's actually going to get back to form. And you're like, of course, like, you just know what's going to happen. But I don't know what it is about this Baltimore defense. Like, they're not as great as they were last year. They're just not having the same success. They're struggling quite a bit. So it's tough for me to like completely put him at 2. I understand his name has a lot of value. I do understand there's always that like scenario where he can have an amazing game. So I get, but I would probably put him down a little bit more. I'd give a little more love to Logan Wilson, Levante David. I'd probably put Roquan probably around where Levante or Wallace is. Probably the only one I would probably move down.
That's fair enough. And as far as the Levante, it's just, man, like, he has done it. He's got the sacks. It's just that these big plays happen, and then if you negate them and you're looking just at the tackles, it takes a lot of luster off him. So I get it. Levante David's a baller. Steve, what were you saying?
Yeah, his tackles aren't quite where you'd want.
What'd you say, Steve?
So, but yeah, I think Levante's big play is the only thing that's really helping him. But yeah, the tackles aren't there. We had 9, I think, last week total.
Right. And Roquan, I agree with you. That's just one of those guys that's like, you'll see in the safeties. There's some guys that are, like you said, just names at this point. But Roquan, he's still right around 10 tackles a game, and he could heat up at any given time. So he's just one of the safer options, at that point. So safe, how safe you are as a play, your floor goes a lot. That's a good point. It goes a long way in my rankings. I don't like to take risks as far as, linebackers when there's so many good out there. Even though it's a little bit different than, the good old days when you had 2 linebackers playing 100% of snaps and you had Lance Briggs and Urlacher and all that. So different time we live in, but Yeah, I like my list, and keep in mind, like Steve said, I mean, as far as these rankings, they change every day. We're on Friday. We're right now. It's Friday. We got till Sunday, so you might even see some tweaks going into the weekend. Right now, we're going to move into defensive backs, but before we do that, I wanted to mention right now our website, IDP Plus, our brand. We are doing a subscription. We are doing a promo code for you for 20% off site wide. So if you want to get a subscription, if you want to purchase something from the website, anything you want to do is right now, when I give you this promo code props, you will get that for 20% off. So get any of our limited time, get any of our access tools, get our data, our IDP articles, and don't miss out on our subscriber Discord. So once again, go to idpplus.com, put a backslash and type in membership and hit enter. And then whatever you decide to purchase, you will get 20% off with the promo code PROPS. So check us out. Get yours today. I'm going to hover over, once again, going to rankings weekly and going to defensive back this time. I did these defensive backs. Defensive back is a very volatile position. Some people you see up there based on name, some performance, but we try to mix it in nicely. Coming in at number 1 and leading their team in total tackles, Budda Baker. Number 2, Julian Love. Number 3, Jesse Bates. Number 4, Nick Cross. Number 5, Kyle Hamilton. Number 6, Xavier Woods. Number 7, Brian Branch. Number 8, Derwin James. Number 9, Tyler Newman. Number 10, Antoine Winfield Jr. Number 11, Deshaun Elliott. 12, Paulson Adebo, already played. So did 13, Alontae Taylor. 14, Quentin Lake. 15, Xavier McKinney. 16, Minka Fitzpatrick. 17, Cam Bynum. 18, Brandon Jones. 19, Reed Blankenship. 20, DeMar Hamlin. 21, cornerback, Jalen Jones. 22, Jordan Whitehead. 23, Antonio Johnson. 24, Cam Curl. And 25, Jalen Petrie. Steve, looking at that top 25 defensive back list, what comes to mind? What are you thinking? What are your initial thoughts?
Well, first, Paulson Adebo's out for the season. That was a devastating injury, unfortunately, for the Saints. So, because he's been fantastic, this year seems to be the year of the cornerback, not the safety.
Right.
Is what I've noticed. Is I'd say that's where the biggest challenge for me is someone who's been doing IDP for over 10 years. Normally, your safety is probably your like bread and butter at the defensive back. I've been playing cornerbacks more lately because it's just I don't know what's going on. I'll give credit. Some of these cornerbacks are not afraid to tackle anymore, which is great. I can't say that about Trayvon Diggs. He just seemed to not want to tackle last week, but a lot of these guys have been fantastic. I would say your list, looking at it, Budda Baker makes sense. He's someone that last year was, I think, loved because of the name, but didn't perform. But this year he's back on it. Bates has been amazing. Nick Cross is probably the biggest sleeper this year that came in out of nowhere and just been balling out.
Mm-hmm.
I love Brian Branch. I really wanted him to go to Dallas when he came into the league, but the one I would say the two people that obviously stand out the most that I can't just I'm not sure how I feel about them. There's Derwin James and Winfield. Obviously, Winfield's been dealing with an injury, so you can't really get on him too much. So I'm going to give him a pass. But the one player that has been playing and has just not been successful at all this season has been Derwin James. Like he's probably one of the biggest disappointments so far this year. So I'm not in love with that spot. I'm not in love with him at all right now. Like he has just been an absolute nightmare. I dropped him in many leagues for at least for redraft purposes because he has just been struggling. I do like the matchup though against Arizona. So I understand moving him up in the top 10. Like the matchup's pretty good because I do think I have a feeling Murray throws a pick. They're going to obviously try to use Connor. I do think it's interesting that Connor's starting to lose some snaps to some of these other running backs, but so I don't mind the pick. I think Chargers win this game, but that's a side note. But But looking at the list, as far as a player I would like to see get a little more love, I was looking at these players, while you were talking. I like Tyke Smith from Tampa Bay. I think he's been great. If you look at his games the last few, I think he had 11 tackles in week 5. He's getting pass deflections. He's making fumble forces. Like he's been pretty good. He's not consistent enough that I want to play him every single week, but he's a nice one that I really really like. Kyle Duggar, I feel like I know he's right on the edge. Like I want to just like move him up some, like especially against Jacksonville.
Yeah,
Trevor Lawrence has just been horrible.
And he's been dealing with some health injuries himself. He's a little bit banged up right now.
He has, because I love Duggar, and I had to end up moving on because I didn't. I have one league that we don't do IR, so like you either drop him or that's it. You hold on to a player, so makes it a little more challenging. But Duggar before his injury was actually starting to play well, and then again he's been really really good. So again one of my favorite players, and I think he's right on the edge. So like if you're looking at this list, I don't think he's in a bad spot, but I do think he gets some love I would like to see. And then really looking at everything else, I would say everything looks pretty good. Because again, if you're talking tackles, Debo's been one of the best, but unfortunately now going to be gone. Like Sidney Cross, love Riley Moss, who I freaking love, and he freaking bombed last night. Because I ended up picking him up because again, he's been making tackles. When you have Surtain on the opposite side, everything's going to his way. And then right. Surtain didn't play last night. So Moss got exposed a little bit, but I think he's one of those players that just needs to get a little bit more attention and love his way.
I think another guy who needs to get attention and love is Antonio Johnson. I mean, he had a rough game last week. It was his lowest tackle output, but so far before last week, he came into every game every week with 5 or more solo tackles. So Antonio Johnson, if you're playing in a tackles league, he's probably heavy tackles league. He's probably already owned. But somebody who on other rankings I see is a little bit lower to me is in mid 30s or 40s. And to me, like this is a dependable playing 100% of snaps. Andre Sisco is not really a big factor there. It's Antonio Johnson's backfield. And this was a highly coveted safety coming out of college and still is not a household name. So I'm trying to give him some love. I fluffed him up into that top 25. And then, Steve, coming back to your Tyke Smith, I just want to tell our viewers and listeners, I completely agree with you. Tyke Smith is a walking bomb as far as the splash plays he's made, and he's done well in the tackles. The only reason I didn't have him in the top 25, and he's kind of like an Ivan Pace here. Like he can definitely have that blow-up week and be inside the top 25. I'm just a little bit concerned. I want to just brief everybody that's, banking on him this week. Does look like that his snap count – is a little bit at risk. Last week when Winfield returned, Winfield started and played 80% of snaps. Jordan Whitehead played his 99% of snaps, but Tyke Smith, week 5 when Winfield wasn't there, Whitehead was banged up. He played 99% of snaps. He was a great play. Even though he had a great stat line, the only warning I can say for him is he only did play 60% of snaps. So that's indeed why I had him dropped a little bit lower. But hey, who knows? Maybe you check, maybe you're a Buccaneers local and you have inside information. Maybe we find it on Twitter that he's going to, play at a higher rate, or maybe we just wait for after this week and see if the proof is in the pudding. But if he can get upwards of, 70, 80% of snaps, I think Tyke Smith is a great defensive back here to start as well.
Yeah, the thing with Tyke Smith is the fact that when Winfield is in the game, Tyke gets into the nickel spot. Like he kind of gets thrown back into the nickel spot, which against Baltimore, I get where you have them, because against Baltimore does not play 3 wide. Like that's not a team that's known for that, right? You're gonna have, Bateman, you have Zay Flowers out, you'll have Likely, you'll have Andrews. Like they play a 2 tight end set typically, so you're not gonna see Tyke out there often enough, unless maybe the game plan to stop. Again, I'm no genius, but maybe the game plan to stop, that Baltimore offense, whether it be Derrick Henry or Lamar, is you put, Winfield, if healthy, into that linebacker role, for the speed and be able to, he's a good hitter, and then put Tyke back in the secondary, opposite of Whitehead. So maybe that's his only opportunity to really get some opportunities there. I just think he does deserve some love because I think he's been pretty good this year. And again, I don't think the list is. I mean, this is probably a little bit more accurate list than I've seen on some folks. Yeah, I mean, looking at it, I mean, even Antonio Johnson, yeah. I mean, like I said, the only one I would probably move up with a little bit would be just Kyle Duggar. Surprised you don't have Julian Blackmon up there. Aren't you the biggest truther? Some Julian Blackmon over there?
Yeah, I am.
You put him on the
Until Nick
outside.
Cross came into town. I mean,
I know Nick Cross.
Yeah, he's got a safe floor. He's got a safe floor. I like Blackmon still.
Yeah, I mean, they're going against Miami, right? So, yeah, maybe make a play or two because Huntley has not played well at quarterback at all.
And somebody I also have to reflect in the rankings is Marcus May because Javon Holland is now, I think he's doubtful or already ruled out. So Marcus May had a great stat line last week, played 100% of snaps. Jordan Poyer did not play. He had 9 total tackles. So if you're, again, in the tackles-heavy league and you need a streamer this week, Marcus May is in. Javon Holland is out. So that would be a great, top 35, top 40 play. So another guy to keep in mind. Thank you for watching this episode of IDP Plus Trends, where we broke down the rankings, IDP for defensive linemen, linebackers, and defensive backs. You can find all my work on Twitter at JohnnyFreakinF1. I do this Trends podcast. I do IDP Plus bets. You can catch me. It's on the same channel, but in the bets section. And I do Twitter weekly waiver wire pickups for both offense and IDP. Steve, is there anything else you want to say before signing off?
No, I mean, we've got a great slate of games. Make sure you guys are prepared. Early game on Sunday, Jaguars and Patriots. 2 Monday night games. So again, we got some great football coming up. Make sure you guys are going to the website. Go check out our rankings. Check out, again, I do the weekly waiver wire video every single week, article and on YouTube. So subscribe. Make sure you guys check out that content. Make sure you guys follow me at AVGJoes_FF. Make sure you guys are following Johnny at JohnnyFreakinF1. We are the best. We are awesome. We're going to help you guys with all of your IDP content this year.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.